Stop. Don't multitask. Don't scroll. Because if you click this, something already tells me one thing. You didn't just have a hard few days. Something inside you was tested, and you didn't even know it. About 72 hours ago, you reached a level of exhaustion that felt different from normal tiredness. Not the kind you fix with sleep, not the kind you complain about. The kind where your mind shuts down, your defenses drop, and whatever is left underneath is the real you. And that's why it mattered. Because when you're exhausted like that, you can't perform. You can't calculate. You can't fake maturity or patience or morality. You react on instinct. And what you did in that moment revealed something irreversible about who you've become, not who you try to be, not who you present online, who you are when you don't have the energy to pretend. That was the test. And here's the part most people never hear. Life doesn't test you when you're strong. It tests you when you're depleted. Anyone can act noble when they're rested, praised, supported. But when you're overwhelmed, misunderstood, lonely, drained, that's when your real character shows up automatically. And 3 days ago, yours did. Something happened in that window, maybe between a conversation that went wrong, a moment that reopened an old wound, a silence so heavy you didn't even have the energy to cry. You were pushed past the point where self-control feels intentional. And in that state when you had every excuse to snap, to manipulate, to be selfish, to get even, you didn't. Not because you were trying to be good. Because goodness was the only thing left. That's the part most people miss. Integrity wasn't something you chose in that moment. It was what came out when choice disappeared. And that's when a line gets crossed. Because there's a difference between morality that requires effort and morality that operates on autopilot. You didn't respond perfectly, but you responded honestly. Maybe you stayed silent when attacking back would have been easier. Maybe you walked away from something no one would have blamed you for taking. Maybe you protected someone else's dignity, even when yours felt ignored. Maybe you resisted something tempting because something deeper in you refused to cross that line. The details don't matter. What matters is this. Your integrity no longer depends on your energy level. And that's when responsibility changes. Not comfort. Not reward. Responsibility. Because here's a truth nobody teaches in religion, self-help, or motivation. Life doesn't promote people based on what they believe. It promotes people based on who they are when nobody's watching, and nothing feels fair. That's the only metric that matters. And that's why what comes next won't feel like celebration. It will feel like weight. More awareness, more clarity, more sensitivity to what's wrong and what's fake. You're going to notice it first in your mind. A sharpness you haven't felt in a long time. Not racing thoughts, clarity. Problems that used to take weeks to emotionally process will suddenly feel obvious. Not easy, obvious. You won't have more answers. You'll have better filters. You'll know what deserves your energy and what never did. And that clarity will quietly isolate you. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. The second change will be emotional. Things that used to hijack your nervous system won't hit the same. Not because you're numb, but because your emotional center recalibrated. You've been through enough chaos that your system learned stability the hard way. You can feel deeply without drowning, care without collapsing, stay calm without suppressing. And people will notice. Some will be drawn to it because stability feels like safety. Others will be uncomfortable because chaos can't control you anymore. Both reactions are data. The third change is subtler but undeniable. Life will start lining things up just enough to make coincidence feel insulting. Right person, right timing, right information without forcing. Not because you're manifesting, but because once your character stabilizes, life doesn't need to block things to protect you from yourself anymore. And this is where most people mess it up. Because the moment clarity arrives, a dangerous thought follows. I finally made it. I'm different now. I'm above what others struggle with. That thought is poison. Not because you're not different, but because the moment growth turns into superiority, everything starts reversing. The people who last at higher levels are not the ones who feel special. They're the ones who remember exactly how hard it was to get here. So if you notice pride creeping in, remember who you were when you were confused, when you were lost, when someone else showed you grace you hadn't earned yet. That memory keeps power clean, because whatever has shifted in you wasn't given for ego. It was given for reliability. The world doesn't need more loud leaders, spiritual performers, or motivational noise. It needs people who don't fold when pressure hits, who don't corrupt influence once they gain it, who don't abandon their values when it finally benefits them to do so. That's the assignment, not to save everyone, not to have answers, but to be proof quietly that transformation is real. If you felt a shift in yourself a few days ago but couldn't name it, if you sensed that something ended even though nothing external changed, type 777 inches the comments. Not as superstition, as recognition. Because people who pass this phase recognize each other by resonance, not words. And if you want guidance for what comes after the test, not hype, not fantasy, but grounded clarity, stay here. Because the hardest part isn't the breaking. It's learning how to live responsibly after you've changed. Your test wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And now, you don't need validation, you need alignment. You might be wondering why, after everything shifted, things didn't immediately get easier. Why clarity arrived, but comfort didn't. That's not a mistake. Because the moment your internal world stabilizes, life stops cushioning you from reality. Before, confusion softened consequences, emotions distracted you, hope kept you waiting. Now those buffers are gone, and what replaces them is responsibility. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you can no longer lie to yourself without feeling it instantly in your body. You've probably already noticed this. Small compromises feel heavier now. Words spoken without integrity linger longer. Distractions don't soothe, they irritate. It's not because you've become rigid. It's because your nervous system stopped tolerating misalignment. This is what people misunderstand when they talk about growth. Growth doesn't feel like motivation. It feels like standards increasing automatically. You don't force discipline. You lose tolerance for chaos. And that creates a strange loneliness. Because once this happens, you realize something uncomfortable. A lot of the connections in your life were built around who you used to be. Around confusion. Around shared struggle. Around mutual avoidance of hard truths. And now, without trying to change anyone, your presence disrupts those dynamics. You're calmer, and that makes others restless. You listen, and that makes others defensive. You don't react, and that makes others exposed. Not everyone will know why they feel uneasy around you. They'll just feel it. Some will pull away quietly. Some will test you. Some will try to provoke the old version of you back into existence. Not because they're bad people, but because stability threatens patterns that rely on emotional volatility to survive. This is where discernment becomes critical. You don't explain yourself. You don't over-justify. You don't dim your clarity to keep others comfortable. You observe. Because the next phase isn't about expansion yet. It's about filtration. Life starts narrowing your environment not to punish you, but to protect what's forming. You may feel drawn to simplicity now. Less noise, less drama, less urgency. Not out of apathy, but out of respect for your energy. You're learning something most people never do. Energy isn't restored by rest alone. It's restored by alignment. And misalignment drains faster than effort ever could. That's why forcing productivity suddenly feels wrong. Why chasing validation feels hollow. Why doing things because you should feels heavier than doing nothing. Your system is recalibrating toward meaning. This is also why ambition might feel quieter, not weaker, more precise. You're no longer chasing everything. You're waiting for what makes sense. And that waiting isn't passive, it's watchful. Because opportunities now need to meet you, not just excite you. If something requires you to betray your values, dull your awareness, or inflate your ego, your body will reject it before your mind explains why. That's not fear. That's intelligence. This phase doesn't come with applause. No announcements. No obvious milestones. Just a growing sense that you can't go back even if you wanted to. And sometimes, that's what hurts the most. Not loss, but the certainty that an old door has closed permanently. You might grieve that version of yourself, the one who hoped more easily, trusted faster, ignored red flags to keep the peace. Honor them. They got you here, but don't romanticize them. Because the reason you're calmer now is because you survived what they couldn't handle alone. And this calm isn't softness. It's readiness. The next phase isn't about surviving anymore. It's about building something that lasts: relationships, work, identity, contribution, without abandoning yourself in the process. And that requires a level of honesty most people avoid their entire lives. So if things feel slower, if the world feels quieter, if you feel less impressed by noise and more drawn to substance, nothing is wrong. You're not stuck. You're being positioned. And positioning always feels like stillness before momentum. If this resonates not emotionally, but somatically, you already know what that means. Stay grounded. The movement hasn't started yet, but when it does, you won't be chasing it. It will meet you where you stand. And you'll be ready not because you planned for it, but because you became the kind of person who could hold it without breaking. At some point, you'll notice something subtle but unsettling. You're no longer motivated by urgency. Deadlines don't scare you the way they used to. Pressure doesn't activate panic, it activates focus. And that's dangerous if you don't understand it. Because urgency used to be the fuel. Fear used to be the engine. Validation used to be the reward. Now those systems are offline. So for the first time, you're forced to ask a real question. What do I move toward when nothing is chasing me? Most people never face this. They stay busy enough to avoid it, distracted enough to postpone it, emotionally reactive enough to confuse movement with progress. You can't anymore. Your mind won't let you lie at that level. That's why indecision may feel heavier now, not because you're confused, but because you're no longer willing to move without meaning. Every choice costs more awareness. And here's where discipline changes its shape. Discipline is no longer forcing yourself to do things you hate. It becomes protecting your clarity from things that waste it. You say no, faster. You disengage, sooner. You stop explaining yourself mid-sentence, not out of arrogance, out of precision. You've learned something expensive. Your attention is the most valuable asset you own, and once given, it doesn't come back the same. This is also why your tolerance for shallow conversations has dropped. Not because you think you're better, but because you've touched depth, and once you've done that, surface-level noise feels physically irritating. You still care about people. You still feel empathy. But you no longer confuse empathy with self-abandonment. And that distinction will save your life more than once. Now, here's the part nobody warns you about. When you stop needing approval, some people will try harder to give it. Compliments increase. Interest resurfaces. Opportunities appear that weren't there before. Not because you're chasing them, but because detachment creates gravity. And this is where restraint matters most. Because not everything that arrives now is meant to stay. Some things return to see if you're still accessible. Some people reappear to test whether boundaries were temporary. Some offers look aligned until you feel the familiar tightening in your chest. That tightening is your cue. Your body learned faster than your mind ever could. So you listen. You don't rush to fill space. You don't grab the first thing that looks promising. You don't confuse attention with alignment. You wait. And waiting, when done consciously, is not passive. It's selective. You're not asking, does this excite me? You're asking, does this respect who I've become? That question changes everything. Because now, success isn't about speed. It's about sustainability. You've seen what happens when growth outpaces integrity. when power arrives before stability, when identity inflates faster than character. You're not interested in that version of winning. You want something quieter, something clean, something you don't have to recover from later. And this is where life begins responding differently. Not dramatically, not instantly, but consistently. Small confirmations, unforced progress, moments where effort and outcome finally feel proportional. That's not luck. That's alignment, paying interest. You're entering a phase where what you build will reflect who you are, not who you're trying to escape. And that means the next steps won't be obvious to everyone else. Some will think you're moving too slowly. Some will think you're underestimating yourself. Some will misunderstand your calm as lack of ambition. Let them. Because they don't feel what you feel. They don't carry the weight you carry. They didn't pass the test you passed. You did. And now, you move differently. Not louder, not faster, but truer. If you're still here, still listening, still present, you already know this isn't about motivation anymore. It's about stewardship of your mind, your energy, your future. And the next phase won't ask you to become someone new. It will ask you to stay who you are consistently, even when it finally starts working. That's the real test. And it's coming sooner than you think. There will come a moment when you realize something quietly unsettling. You're no longer waiting for permission. Not from your family, not from society, not from the version of yourself that needed reassurance before every step. You move now because movement feels honest, not because someone is watching. And that's when things begin to accelerate in a way you didn't plan for. Not externally at first, internally. Decisions that once took weeks, now take minutes. Emotional recovery that once required days now happens overnight. Doubt still appears, but it doesn't take control. You don't argue with it anymore. You acknowledge it. Then you act anyway. This is what people confuse with confidence. But confidence implies certainty. What you have now is self-trust. And self-trust doesn't eliminate fear. It just removes fear's authority. That's why setbacks start landing differently. They don't collapse you. They don't trigger spirals. They don't feel personal. They feel informational. Something didn't work. Something wasn't aligned. Something needs adjustment, and you adjust without drama. That emotional efficiency will be misunderstood. Some will say you've become distant. Others will say you've changed. They're right, but not in the way they think. You didn't harden. You integrated. You stopped leaking energy into reactions that never led anywhere. And now that energy has somewhere else to go. Creation, building, long-term thinking. This is where your focus starts shifting naturally. You care less about being impressive and more about being effective. Less about recognition and more about results that compound quietly. You start thinking in years instead of moments. What can I build that won't collapse under pressure? What habits will still hold when life gets difficult again? What kind of person do I need to be when responsibility increases? Because it will. Stability attracts responsibility, the same way chaos attracts drama. People will begin trusting you with more. Not necessarily authority, but weight. Problems they can't solve alone. Decisions they don't want to carry by themselves. Moments that require calm instead of opinion. You won't seek this role. It will find you. And this is where boundaries matter more than ever. Because reliability can turn into burden if you're not careful. You are not here to save everyone. You are not here to absorb every emotional spill. You are not here to become a container for other people's unresolved lives. You help where it's clean. You contribute where it's mutual. You step back where it costs your alignment. That discernment isn't selfish. It's necessary. Because the work ahead, the real work, requires clarity that hasn't been diluted. What you're building now isn't visible yet. That's intentional. Foundations are quiet. And if you rush visibility before structure, you repeat old cycles under new names. You're not here to repeat. You're here to stabilize something that lasts. And that means accepting something most people avoid. This path is narrower, fewer distractions, fewer people, fewer shortcuts, but more coherence, more peace, more internal agreement. And once you've tasted that, there's no trade that feels worth going back. You may still feel moments of impatience. That's human. But notice the difference. The impatience isn't about wanting more. It's about wanting truth expressed fully. And that takes time. So you keep going. Not because you're chasing a future version of yourself, but because you're already becoming consistent with who you are, even when no one is clapping yet. And when the external world finally reflects that consistency, it won't feel like surprise. It will feel like confirmation, because the shift didn't start out there. It started when you stopped abandoning yourself internally. And everything since has been alignment catching up. Stay with it. The next phase won't demand intensity. It will demand precision. And you're closer to that than you think. Eventually, you'll notice something that would have scared the old version of you. Life feels ordinary again. Not empty, not dull, just calm. The highs aren't overwhelming. The lows aren't consuming. Days begin to carry a steady rhythm instead of emotional spikes. And if you're not careful, you might mistake this for stagnation. It isn't. This is stability, the thing most people chase their entire lives without realizing what it actually feels like. Stability doesn't announce itself. It doesn't thrill the nervous system. It doesn't make for dramatic stories. It just works. You wake up, knowing what matters. You move through the day without negotiating with yourself. You go to sleep without replaying conversations or second-guessing decisions. Peace stops being something you seek. It becomes the baseline. And from this place, something important happens. You stop needing life to prove anything to you. Success becomes quieter. Failure becomes less personal. Other people's opinions lose their sharpness. Not because you don't care, but because you're no longer building your identity in public. You've already built it internally. This is where your actions start speaking without effort. Consistency replaces motivation. Reputation replaces explanation. Trust replaces persuasion. People don't follow you because you inspire them. They follow because you're predictable in the best way. You show up. You stay steady. You don't collapse under pressure or inflate under praise. That kind of presence is rare, and it changes the way life interacts with you. Opportunities stop feeling random. Relationships stop feeling chaotic. Progress stops feeling fragile. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fragmented. There's alignment between what you think, what you say, and what you do. And that alignment is power. Not the loud kind, the sustainable kind, the kind that lets you build a life you don't need to escape from. You'll still have goals. You'll still want growth. You'll still feel challenged. But none of it will cost you your center. And that's the real outcome of everything you went through. Not enlightenment, not superiority, not specialness, reliability. You became someone you can depend on. And from that point forward, whatever you build, career, relationships, contribution, legacy, will be built on something solid. So if you ever look back and wonder why the path was so quiet, why the lessons were so internal, why the transformation didn't come with applause,